What's going on, guys? It's Mike. Welcome back. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit more about distributist thinking. About a video or two ago, I did a roundup on what was going on. I think it was towards the end of October. And I shared that I was reading a book. The book was called Toward a Truly Free Market by John C. Médaille. Médaille, an economist and professor, an academic in the area of political economy. And I was saying that the book was interesting. I was in the midst of reading the book. I mispronounced a bunch of things. I didn't say Médaille's name right. I think I was calling him John C. Médaille because that's how it's spelled. I'm famous for not pronouncing things correctly that I read. And I struggled with the word distributist. I was like distributivism, I was like throwing a V in there. But it's distributist thinking. This is a form of political economics, a political economy concept that's interested with how do you distribute the benefits of a society in a good way across the society. The economy of a society will generate benefits, it'll create wealth, etc. And, to make sure that things are good and healthy for everyone, not just fair. It's not about fair necessarily, but what's good for the economy, what's good for the society. You want to make sure that things are distributed in a way that are good. Not just about equity, meaning, well, these people had a rough start, things were unfair for their ancestors, etc. So how do we make them whole? But I think more in terms of this person is contributing to the economy. They're working, they're creating wealth in a certain way. Are we making sure that they are receiving back a just amount? Is there justice in our system where someone who has a legitimate claim to that wealth is receiving it? Now, in America, we tend to think about the capitalist system. We equate capitalism with free market. Free markets for us equal capitalism. And I think I mentioned in the previous video, I've always wrestled with that idea. I have not been convinced that free market has to equal capitalism, that capitalism is one way towards a free market, but it's not necessarily the only way. And that you can have free markets and entrepreneurship and wealth creation, etc. It doesn't necessarily have to be a capitalist-based economy. And I came to that after reading many years ago Hilaire Belloc and his seminal The Survi State. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It came out probably in the 30s or 40s, 1930s or 40s. Belloc, a Catholic intellectual, I think he was English and French, I think, wrote this book, The Survi State. He wrote a lot of things. G.K. Chesterton, another one that kind of got his arms around some of this thinking. And both of them, in one way or another, were distributist in their approach. They embraced this idea that there are better ways to distribute the wealth and benefits of a society that are fair and equal and just and good, and actually lead to a healthier society. So John Médaille has written this book. It was written back in 2010. It's a very approachable book. There's a little bit of technical talk from an economic standpoint, demand curves and whatnot. But that's just as he's kind of establishing some groundwork so that he can get at the topic. The book is structured quite well. Essentially, he lays out his case. He kind of explains the current situation, why it's untenable, the flaws with the capitalist system, which I'll talk about in a moment here. He makes an argument for what an economy should be about, what it should be accomplishing, the purpose of an economy, and then also the purpose of a good government. He gets at some of the, again, flaws of the existing systems, both economies and governments that we're used to now, takes his shots at capitalism, and then lays out his case for what a good distributist economy and political system would look like, and then tries to apply that thinking to things like taxes, to land, to free markets, to healthcare, and so on, to say, look, if we went more along the lines of the distributist way of thinking, this is how we could organize our society and wouldn't things be grand. Now, there's an element of naivete, I think, in Médaille's writing. I don't think that he's naive. I think he's trying to present his argument in a simple manner. And I think that simple manner sometimes comes across as almost naive, meaning, well, we could just cut this and change that, and very simple kind of broad stroke kind of solutions or applications of his thinking to the current world that we live in. And you read this, I found myself saying, I hear you, I just don't think it's that simple, meaning I would love for you to be right. I would love for it to be that easy. I just don't think it is that easy. I think this doesn't take into consideration other factors. But to be fair to Médaille, I don't think that he was trying to lay out a whole policy handbook here that, you win office, you take this book and you start applying everything Médaille says, and presto changeo, you got yourself a just system that is sustainable, fantastic for all parties, etc. So it reads a little simplistic at times. I mentioned earlier it's a little technical at the beginning where he's talking about things like demand curves and whatnot. But some of his applications and ideas and solutions seem a bit simplistic. I don't think that's the fault of the author. I think it's a little bit what the book is trying to accomplish. He's trying to get the ideas out there. These would spark discussion. Of course, the application of these ideas would be much more nuanced, let's say. And that's fair. I don't think he's done anything wrong or a disservice there. But it's a great way to get your arms around it. If you're interested in learning more about distributist thinking, I think this is a good book to start with. I've not read a lot on distributist theory, so I can't tell you out of the 10 books I've read, this is the best. But having read the Survi State, being familiar with some of Bloch's thinking, and picking this up recently, it's just a great way. And there are other people. I think the American Conservative talks, in fact, it's quoted on the cover, the best alternative economic thinking in a long time, the American Conservatives. That's quoted on the cover of the book. You can see the book here. Good stuff. You can pick it up on Amazon. I highly recommend it. Easy read, interesting, and quite thought-provoking. And even if you don't embrace everything that Médaille says, it gives you more context and a different lens with which to think about economics, politics in our society. And I think, to that point, this is an important thing to try to do, meaning look at our economy through different lenses. We have called ourselves a capitalist society for generations, and we've embraced it and championed it. It's come at a cost. And what you see in more current, younger generations, an embrace of an enemy, which the capitalists and the free marketers and the independent, the people that want to be free, the libertarians, thought was vanquished, and that's socialism and Marxism and communism. If you had told somebody in the 80s or 90s, when the Berlin Wall came down in the early 90s, when the 80s, the Soviet Union was imploding upon itself, into the 90s where it actually did fall apart, and we had, the revolution and the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Even you saw China over the last 20, 30 years transitioning from a centrally controlled economy to more of a kind of capitalist style Marxism, where they liberalized their markets to start getting the economy going and to leap into the 21st century, et cetera, to become the behemoth that they are now. You would have said, well, gee, communism has been proven flawed. It doesn't work. We've all known this, and we've been proven right, and it's failed across the world. It's being rejected across the world. Capitalism, free markets, they're all being embraced. This is a glorious future, and yay, let's dance on Marx's grave and move forward. And here we are, not that much later. I mean, the Berlin Wall, I want to say, fell in the late 80s, early 90s. Why am I going blank on that? I should know when that happened. Shame on me. But you see this, like, recent history thing having happened, we all thought that book had been written and was done. And here we are with a big segment of the population embracing socialism as the way forward, as the solution to the ills of our society. What's interesting with Médaille, at least for me, when I read Distributist Thinking as represented in his book, he uses a lot of language that feels a little creepy to me. Whenever, you're sitting here in 2024, soon to be 2025, and you're reading a book that uses words like justice and equity, as a conservative, it makes me a little uncomfortable, if I'm honest. What's interesting about Médaille is I don't think he's coming from a leftist perspective on this stuff. It's a shame we have these words. Everybody wants justice in their life. If you've been wronged, you want justice. If you've put into a system, you want that system to be equitable. You do a deal, you want the deal to be equitable. I'm busy reading Never Split the Difference. Is it Riley? Who's the guy that's written that? It's FBI top negotiator. It's about negotiating. Never Split the Difference. And, people want a fair deal. They want to make sure that when they negotiate, they walk away with a fair deal. Everybody wants these things. They want fairness. They want equity. They want justice. Sadly, the creeps of our world, like Marx is just a terrible human being, sadly, and had quite a devout father in some ways, so it's kind of sad. But anyway, they take language that is useful, that is valuable, that speaks of things that are true, and they pervert them for their own cause. Take the word tolerance, as an example. But I want to get off a field here in this kind of discussion. Reading the book, it's just interesting that Médaille uses language that you or I today, 14 years after its publication, would very quickly associate with the left, with progressivism, with Gnostic utopian projects to change the world and force you and I to come into order and make things equitable and just and all that kind of stuff, things that we would probably reject. But I don't think he's using it to that end. I don't think he's using that with that intention. And to be fair to him, how could he have known? So, all right, let's talk a little bit. Médaille opens up talking about things like, what is an economy? What is political economy? What is the purpose of an economy? And essentially he says the purpose of an economy, and he's quoting other thinkers in this, the purpose of an economy is how societies provide for their material reproduction. The societies have material aspects to them: homes, cars, people, land, buildings, all this kind of stuff. We are material beings. We need a material world in order to thrive. So the economy is how a society provides for its material success, its material sustenance, its reproduction. Sorry, a little awkward there. That's the purpose of an economy. Now, you and I might think, well, an economy's purpose is how do we enrich me? How does everybody get richer? But really, at its root, an economy's job is to make sure that the material reproduction of the society can carry forward. A flawed economy does not provide for that, does not allow for this material reproduction, which is where centralized government, Marxism, centralized economies don't work. They make it next to impossible to reproduce the material needs of a society over time and sustain those needs. But he makes the argument that capitalism is in the same boat. The capitalism is really no better than Marxism. The capitalism is truly flawed. And he said the thing is, we do associate capitalism with a free market, but the problem is capitalism is anything but free. It is unsustainable on its own. Capitalism does not work without heavy government intervention, heavy government regulation, heavy government salvation at times. If you were alive during the 2008, 2009, 2010 economic crisis, like I was running a business at the time, you had companies that got in big trouble. These are big capitalist companies. AEI was one, if you remember that. And they were too big to fail, which meant if this company fails, as the market's going down, if this company fails, it's going to wipe out America as we know it. And not just as a nation, but my life, your life. This is going to be utter destruction, economic destruction. We're talking Great Depression, generations of people starving to death, etc. And so, to protect our free market, the government has to get in there and save AEI, because if they don't save AEI, it's going to hurt all of us. It's really to save us. And so he makes arguments. He doesn't bring up AEI, but this idea that government has to sustain capitalism in order for it to work should tell us that capitalism is not truly free market economics. There's nothing free about it. You get Keynesian, monetary policy, Keynesian, there's just all this government shenanigans and monkeying around with the economy to keep it going. Banks imploding, governments bailing them out. Companies about to crash, government bailing them out. Tariffs and you even look at the agricultural world. I mean, how many subsidies right now does agriculture get? And I'm not picking on farms, but a lot of farming has become giant corporate farming. These are not mom and pop family farms. Those are being squeezed out and destroyed, by the way, by the giant publicly traded massive farming conglomerates that are tied into big chemicals with pesticide and genetically modified Monsanto corn crops, seed, and all that. You got this giant capitalization, giant corporatization of our economy across all its sectors. And this requires massive government meddling for it to work. And you see it show up in so many different ways, between lobbying, between bailouts, and just all the stuff that I've been chronicling here. And so Médaille makes the argument that, capitalism, it actually doesn't work. And one of the problems, and this is what Block talked about, is that capitalism, what ends up happening is the wealth starts to accumulate and flow towards capital. We see this right now. It's happening in our current market, where the technology companies, big tech is kind of like the new means to production. And they are amassing all the power, all the capital. And people like you and I, individuals are feeling more and more. Individuals are feeling more and more vulnerable. We're feeling threatened. By the way, I keep sniffing allergies. I apologize. It is what it is. But all the money and the wealth and the power flows to these tech companies, to these big conglomerates, these corporations, agriculture, and so on, all of them. And the individual starts to feel more and more alienated, isolated, and vulnerable. We don't have any institutions. We don't have any ways to protect ourselves financially and legally, because all the power and the money flows to the capital. And what we end up doing is we turn to the government and we say, save us. We're so vulnerable. And the government's like, with pleasure. I'd love to save you. Well, you end up giving up freedoms and rights. So it's kind of a catch-22. You make the argument, well, no, we want free markets, which really means capitalism. Well, you're feeding your own enemy. You turn to the government and go, wow, I'm vulnerable. You got to save me from these terrible capitalists that are just rapacious. And using technology, we've talked about this, like, some of these apps that will use AI, et cetera, to try to figure out how to price, based on demand in moment by moment. You go into a Wendy's and they're using some system where they've got these menus that are screens, really, that can be updated from the mothership. And they're like, look, it's raining outside and it's lunchtime, boost the price of the chili because we know that's going to be a premium. People are going to want it and we can make more money. They're just looking for ways to suck as much of our money out of our pockets as they possibly can. And we turn to the government like, you got to save us. So we're just kind of like, are you going to ask the wolf for help, or are you going to ask the bear for help? Which one are you asking for help? Because they both want to eat you. They both mean you harm. The other thing about capital too, we just had a big election. Part of the election was a referendum, I think, on the border and the way that the different parties have been handling illegal immigration. A lot of times people don't realize capitalists are behind that flow of illegal immigration. Big corporations want cheap labor. And how do you get cheap labor? Because this is one of the flaws of capitalism. It treats labor as a commodity. We'll talk about that in half a second. But these capitalists, they want cheap labor. They don't want to pay any more than they have to for labor, employees. And so if you can get the government to open up the floodgates and let in lots of undocumented, uneducated, unqualified, uncertified, all this kind of stuff, workers, well, they're willing to work for peanuts. They're just grateful to be here. You can't blame them for wanting an opportunity. But the capitalists are behind that. What that ends up doing is people go, well, yeah, I didn't want to do that job. It puts downward pressure on all wages. You work in a factory, you get a pretty good buck for what you do, et cetera. You open the floodgates, they open the floodgates and let the labor in, the cheap labor. Well, next thing you know, your boss is like, well, Mike, you don't like it. You can go work somewhere else. We got, Jose and Juan and so on. They're happy to come work here, and they're not asking for much, and they're not a pain in the neck like you are. They're not demanding all kinds of things like benefits and so on. And so let me just jump right into it. Let's talk about the three flaws with capitalism three kind of faulty ideas that capitalism has, according to Médaille. So the three things are, capitalism has this kind of commodity concept. It's like you buy low, sell high, and it treats everything as a commodity. That's fine if you're getting pig iron or wheat that you somehow then put into your manufacturing process and end up with a product you value add. However, it treats labor, money, and land as commodities. And Médaille's argument is those three things are not actually commodities. And here's why this is important. Labor, for instance, if you treat labor as a commodity, meaning I need to get labor as cheap as I possibly can, well, the thing is, you cannot make wealth. You can't create anything without labor. There's got to be some labor somewhere. And if you sit and say, well, let's get the labor as cheaply as we can, it's just an input. It's kind of like pig iron. They mine some iron, they ship it on railroad cars over to the factory. We put it into the machine, and out pops, auto parts and, just different stuff. I don't even know, iron skillets. Everybody likes a good iron skillet. And that's how we make our wealth. But you need labor. Labor isn't just some commodity that gets dug out of the earth. And here's the problem. When you try to get your labor as cheaply as you possibly can so that you've got good margins, the labor isn't just labor. Like pig iron is just pig iron. It's just an inert thing that you put into your system and you turn it into something else. Labor are people. And essentially, for your economy to work, you need people to have money so that they can go out and buy your iron skillets. So if you employ people in your factory and you push down the wage as low as you possibly can, you are in essence impoverishing your people as much as you can get away with, to make your iron skillets so that you can then have great margin. But then at the same time, you need your workers to go back out into the economy and buy things and keep the economy healthy, because when the economy is not healthy, people are not buying your iron skillets. And so there's an example where capitalism has some flawed thinking. They do the same thing with money. They treat money like a commodity, capital. You go, well, we got this commodity. We just need more access to capital. But what is money? And if you think about the economic system we live in, how is money created? It's been created in different ways throughout history. But in our modern economy, money is created out of thin air. So essentially a bank doesn't have to go to the Treasury to get money. They don't have to borrow against it. The Federal Reserve doesn't even really create the money by itself. But there are these rules. So like a bank, if it's fractional lending, it's like if the bank has 1,000 of your dollars on deposit, so you put $1,000 in the bank can turn around and go, great, well, we're allowed to lend 10 times the amount against that 1,000, which means if I've got $1,000 in the bank, then I can lend out $10,000 because I've got 10% in cash to kind of back things up, because the odds of everybody wanting to pull their money out of the bank at the same time are next to zero. And quite frankly, the government wouldn't allow that to happen. If there was a run on the bank, they shut it down to protect the economy. Again, capitalism. But the banks essentially just create money out of thin air. You give them $1,000, they put it in the bank for you, they hold on to it, and then they go and loan me $10,000. Well, where did that other $9,000 come from? They just created it. They just wrote it onto their balance sheet. And that's how money gets out into the economy. Now, of course, the Treasury prints dollars, but those dollars printed are not how money gets created. Money gets created by some magic trick on a spreadsheet in a bank down the street from you, and it happens all over the country, all over the time. I'm oversimplifying, and people, I'm not an economist, so don't come after me. And then lastly, land. Capitalism treats land as a commodity. But the interesting thing about land is it has no value unless we give it value. What I mean by that is you can go buy a plot of land and you can get it cheap. It's way outside of town. It's this dusty, dirty little corner. Nobody cares. You buy it, you get it cheap, and you sit on it for 50 years or 30 years or 40 years. Well, what happens? The city's doing its thing and it's growing and people are moving to the city and developers are building new streets and their new neighborhoods. And you've got this plot of land that as the city grows towards it, maybe there's a factory that gets put in, a Volvo opens up a plant near you. Oh, all of a sudden people are like, yay, new jobs. You've done nothing. You've done nothing to that land. You bought it cheap. But over time, the activities of all kinds of other people, of the government, of the community, of other business owners, of people coming in, building houses and living in the area, wanting more amenities and services, maybe a park gets built down the street, maybe there's a highway put in. All of a sudden, your land becomes more valuable. You actually didn't create that value. It was the growth of everything around you. The only thing that you did is you go, well, you know what? I wonder if the city's going to come out this way in 30 years. I think I'll buy this land. And then you just sit on it. So the argument is land is not a commodity because it doesn't have value unless the community somehow invests value in it. And unused land actually hurts an economy. If you've got land sitting there that somebody owns, unused, and they're just sitting on it and they're waiting for the value to go up and up and up, even though they haven't done anything with it to create value, to create wealth, that's a problem. So again, not an economist, not going to argue all that. All right, so what is the answer? I'm going long here. What's the answer? So distributist theory, distributist kind of economics says, well, how do we make things more just? If you can't create wealth without the confluence, the coming together of capital, money, labor, people, and land, if there's no way that you can create wealth without those three things, then how do we make sure the wealth that's created is just spread a little bit more equitably? Not across all of society. They're not saying, how do we tax businesses more? That's more of a socialist redistribution concept. And distributists are not redistributionists. They're saying, look, if you work at a factory, you help create the wealth. Yes, the capitalists should get money back. They put money in. There's value to that money. They invested. They took risks. But the labor should get something too. Labor should not be treated as a commodity. And the land is valuable to the whole community. The community should get something out of that land use that they're not getting because of private property rights, et cetera. Again, I think you're going to get different stripes of distributists. I'm not going to argue, what land tax and all that should look like. But there was one idea that I thought was really interesting that Médaille talks about, and this is the just wage. It's a concept that was put forward by Pope Leo XIII. This is a Catholic Pope. In 1891, he had what is called an encyclical. And I'm not Catholic. I did grow up Catholic, but I haven't been tracking with Catholic theology necessarily. Médaille, I believe, is a Catholic thinker, so it's going to be informed by this. But the distributist idea of a just wage was put forward by Pope Leo XIII in 1891. And that idea states very clearly that a worker, a man, should be able to care for his family in a way that is dignified, given the standards of that society of the time. He should be able to care for his family in a way that is dignified, assuming that he is both thrifty and moral in the way that he lives his life, without having to put his wife and children out to work, and that income should allow for a dignified way to live. They don't have to live in the most Tony neighborhood, just dignified way to live according to the standards of the society. Wife and kids should not be put out as paid labor to make that happen. And it should be enough that this person being thrifty is able to set money aside for times of indigence. Let's say he gets sick. Let's say it's time for him to retire. Let's say there's some economic crisis where he finds himself between jobs, that family can get by. And so the idea of a just wage is that people can take care of themselves in a way that's just and moral and good. Now, what's interesting about this is Pope Leo and the just wage concept is not arguing that all people should have this, that the government should guarantee this dignified way of living. No, he's saying a laborer, someone that's working. So it puts the onus on the individual to have to go out, find good work, find work appropriate to their skills, station in life, and all that kind of stuff, and then be able to care for their family in a way that's moral. And it's a very intelligent way to think about labor and work and remuneration. And when you start to unpack this idea, you start to realize that, yes, companies could do better making sure that their employees are able to care for themselves. I'll go back to capital. We love this idea that everybody can go have professions, and I'm not going to comment on should women work. This is not and in the comments you're going to go, I bet he's a, misogynist. Yeah, whatever. Like, say whatever you want to say. But there was a time not very long ago in our country's history and in the West where women did not go off to manufacturing jobs or professional jobs. We had women teachers, women nurses, we had women administration people, et cetera. There were roles for women in our working world. But we didn't necessarily open it up to management and all that kind of stuff. Well, you would say, well, yes, we've made things more fair. Talk to a working mom how fair it is, really. I mean, she's expected to go get a college degree, get her education, get herself in debt, get married, have a family, have all the kids and a home with her husband, get out there, work her bippy off, come home, get dinner ready, shuttle kids back and forth to doctors' appointments and so on. You could talk about how feminist and how fair and everything our society has become. It still falls on the mom. Let's admit it. Come on. It still falls on the mom. And this idea that, well, no, now the dads and the moms are going to share the responsibility. And boy, millennials are so much better than their parents and generation. Oh, you guys are great. You're so right. You're so just and good. But the fact of the matter is it falls on the mom. It's capital that wanted access to more labor. When you've got only men working in the economy, and I'm not trying to shut women out, I'm just saying just think about the dynamic here. When you've got women shut out from the economy and only men can work, that's a limited labor supply. And the economists said, well, we need to open this up because there's so few men, they can command higher rates to do this work. But if we double the employment pool and get women and men out there working, which is what they did in communist countries too. It didn't matter if you're a man or a woman, everyone had to work. You don't work, you don't eat. They just put you in some government factory and you just grind it out. Well, that lowered the rates that you had to pay people. Women are upset that we don't get paid as much as men. Well, men don't get paid as much as men used to get paid. All of us have seen our incomes come down. Not making an argument that we should remove women from the workforce before everybody gets all wound up, but I'm just talking about the economic dynamic. You often don't think about the other side of it. We get so my rights, my economy, my salary, my profession, my body. We don't want to talk about, well, hang on a second. There's another facet or two to this discussion that is at least worth talking about. But again, the Pope saying back in the day, Leo XIII, let's talk about a just wage. Now, there are some other concepts that Médaille gets into, how to structure governments and how to have solidarity amongst workers and all this. I don't want to get too much into that, but he does in the second half of the last half of the book or last quarter of the book, give some examples. Last quarter probably talks about some companies. There's a big corporation in Spain called the Mondragon Group or Corporation. A lot of similar to an ESOP. Everybody's got a voting right. 100,000 employees plus. I'd like to do a little more research. He really covers that on very superficially. I'd like to do a little more research and understand more about that. Talks about a region in Italy. It's like Emilia Roma. I forget exactly. This is just from memory. That's very much kind of naturally organized this way. Lots of small manufacturing, working with each other, et cetera. Much more just wage. And in both Mondragon Corporation and this region in Italy, people always earning way more than their contemporaries. The Italian region always more prosperous, thriving, good times and bad, ahead of its own other regions in the country. So some interesting examples. Then he gives some ideas on how governments can take this thinking and apply it. In the context of this election that just happened, and the types of people that incoming President-elect Trump has been putting around him, I'd be curious to see from an economic perspective where he lands. I mean, Trump is truly a capitalist. He's a populist, conservative in a way. He's probably more centrist right, populist in his own dealings. I'm sure he's pushed rightward by other people and their thinking. But from an economic standpoint, all the news has been Department of Defense and healthcare and all this kind of stuff, the FDA, et cetera, justice appointments, who's he going to appoint to different chairs and all this. But what I'm not hearing much of is his economic appointees. Who are they thinking from an economic standpoint? So I'll be keeping an eye on that and maybe trying to unpack some of their thinking. But yeah, if you're interested in learning more about distributism, if some of these ideas seem interesting, I've not necessarily communicated them well, but if they seem interesting to you, yeah, I'd highly recommend the book. John C. Médaille, Toward a Truly Free Market, and interesting read, not too technical, maybe a little simplistic at times, but I think based on the goal of the book, very reasonable. Yeah. Let me know what your thoughts are if you've ever looked into distributist thinking, distributist policy, if you've had thoughts on, capitalist versus Marxist versus free market versus all comers when it comes to an economy. And I'd love to know what you think on some of that stuff. Guys, as always, love each and every one of you. Do me a favor, check out my free newsletter. You can sign up, link in the description below, and I will catch you all in the next video. Cheers.